I was a U.S. Marine, trained in explosives, driven by hate, and I had a plan to blow up a mosque in my hometown. No one knew, not my wife, not my friends, not even the people I prayed with after I converted to Islam. But something happened, something that not only stopped me, but changed everything. This is the story of how the people I once planned to kill saved my life, and helped me find my soul. He had a plan. A dark, deliberate plan that would shake his small town to its core. It was during Ramadan, on a Friday, when the mosque would be full. The thought festered within him, fueled by years of rage and twisted logic. On the surface, he was just another troubled kid, one who roamed the streets, fell into bad company, and got into trouble constantly. But underneath that exterior, something more dangerous was growing. He had come to believe that Muslims were out to get him, that they were all a threat. A hijab or a pair of sandals on dark skin became signals of suspicion. Even when he no longer wanted to live, he clung to hatred because it gave him a reason to keep going. Lost between despair and rage, he found himself dialing in coordinates, watching, waiting. Richard McKinney's journey began far from the crossroads of violence. Born in California and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, he joined the military at 18. Life swept him across continents, Panama in 1989, Desert Storm in the early 90s, then Somalia. After a short stint as a civilian, he rejoined the military and served until a final injury in Iraq forced his retirement in 2006. Just 3 years later, everything would change, he would become a Muslim. Today, he walks a very different path, traveling and speaking to reshape the narrative he once helped perpetuate. Before that transformation, however, his life had spiraled in another direction. Raised in a nominally Christian home, Richard knew the religion, but it never held real meaning for him. He was drawn more to nationalism than spirituality, the flag replaced the cross. His teenage years were rough, drugs, rebellion, and running away from home. The military was his escape from that chaos, a decision that offered structure but also planted seeds of hatred. His final deployment in Ramadi in 2006 left him wounded, both physically and mentally. During a raid on a suspected Al-Qaeda stronghold, an IED exploded beneath the building. He was thrown from the blast, torn through a hole in the wall, and though he doesn't remember the moment, the injuries remain etched in his body to this day. The aftermath was a mental storm. Bitterness consumed him, and he clung to the belief that all Muslims were enemies. Even the thought of dying felt more bearable than letting go of his hatred. At home in Indiana, he decided to act. Over the course of 3 years, he built a bomb. Quietly, methodically. He scouted the Islamic center in his town several times, studying the flow of people every Friday, just like he used to study battlefield terrain. He noticed that almost no one ever walked behind the building. That would be his spot, isolated, hidden. The plan was to plant the device during the night and detonate it from a bank parking lot 2,500 meters away. It was a gamble, but one he was willing to take. He sat in that lot, watching, waiting, counting down the time. His plan was nearly complete. He had accepted the consequences long before. He didn't expect to escape. On the contrary, he anticipated a trial, a conviction, even execution. That was the statement he wanted to make. He believed that one day, people would see him as a hero. The kind of hero who didn't get a flag-draped coffin but made a stand. He knew where to place the bomb, had done the recon, studied the building. Then came the spark that unraveled his entire plan, a simple comment from his daughter. She mentioned a Muslim classmate, and Richard exploded in rage. He believed he had failed his family, failed to protect them. But what truly shook him wasn't his anger, it was his daughter's reaction. Her eyes filled not with fear, but confusion. For the first time, she looked at him not with love, but with doubt. He stormed off, his mind spinning, his heart sinking. Upstairs in his bedroom, tears fell. How could he convince his daughter that he was right? That Muslims were evil. But he had no proof, nothing real, just hate and assumptions. And so, Driven not by curiosity but a desperate need to validate his beliefs, he went to the mosque. It was the only place where he could find what he was looking for. He stepped into that building, heart pounding, mind racing. He tried to hide his tension, to act normal. But later, the people there would tell him he failed miserably. The hatred in his eyes had given him away. Richard stepped into the mosque again that Friday, trying to mask the tension in his body. But it was written all over him, his nerves, the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. People noticed. Still, he introduced himself calmly, saying he was just curious about Islam, just wanted to learn more. It wasn't a complete lie, but far from the full truth. He shook hands, spoke with several people, and tried to observe everything with sharp focus. The khutbah, the Friday sermon, began. He listened closely. The words sounded sincere, even beautiful, but he couldn't shake the suspicion. In his mind, it had to be staged. They know I'm here, he thought. They're putting on a show. He half expected secret propaganda operations in the basement. Then someone handed him a Quran. Take it, they said. Read it. Come back if you have questions. To Richard, it felt like someone had just handed him the holy grail of evil. Finally, something he could study, analyze, tear apart, proof he could show to others, especially his daughter. And so he took it home, opened the pages, and began to read. He came back the next week. And the next. Each time, a little more changed in him. The community was surprised. This outsider, clearly not Muslim, kept showing up, Quran in hand, questions ready. He was reading deeply, critically, but something strange was happening. The Quran didn't match the image he had in his head. It didn't reflect the acts of violence and hatred he'd seen in war. Instead, he saw compassion, justice, purpose. Even more surprising, he saw those same values in the people around him, real people in Muncie, Indiana, living by the book. At first, he rationalized it. Maybe these are the good Muslims I've heard about, he told himself. They must be the exception. But as he met more people, watched more videos, good and bad, and kept comparing everything to what he read in the Quran, a realization began to settle in. The terrible acts he'd witnessed didn't reflect the faith itself. They were distortions. The Quran spoke of mercy, unity, restraint, of honoring human life. Verses like 5:32 struck him hard, whoever kills a soul, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. Other verses softened his heart even more. We made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. He saw it playing out before his eyes, Muslims who were engaged in community, government, service. It clicked. The more he read, the more the weight of hate began to lift. Slowly, his anger unraveled. Something else took its place, a quiet, steady clarity. He realized his impressions of Islam had come from the worst examples imaginable. But now, he was seeing the truth for himself. Still, the final shift came not just through study, but in dreams. In one, he stood on a rifle range, shooting at a paper target, something he'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, the paper began to bleed. He tried to wipe it clean. It kept bleeding. It wouldn't stop. In that moment, even in the dream, he understood, this wasn't just a target. This was a human life. That was the breaking point. That dream, layered on everything he'd read and experienced, told him his humanity was returning. He hadn't even known he'd lost it. And now, he wanted to protect it. Islam, and the teachings he had once wanted to destroy, had become his salvation. He returned to the mosque and told the two men he'd grown close to, I want to take Shahada. They looked at each other, and then at him. No, they said. Richard was stunned. But then they smiled. Brother, you've got more to learn. And then, after a moment, all right. Come on. He recited the words first in English, then in Arabic, awkwardly, imperfectly. But with each syllable, it was as if a great burden had been lifted from his soul. He raised his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt free. Whole. Reborn. Later, as life went on, he found himself in college, 40-something years old, sitting in a professor's office, sipping coffee, recounting the whole journey. He didn't even plan to tell the story that day. But the words came out, and the professor sat silent, stunned. Because who could imagine that the man once set on blowing up a mosque was now living proof of the power of grace, truth, and transformation? She stared at me, eyes wide. "Whoa," she said. "You have to tell that story. That could change lives." I blinked. "Really? What are you doing this afternoon?" I shrugged. "Finish this coffee, go home." "No, no, no," she cut in. "You've got my next class. You're telling that story." So, I did. I stood up in front of her next class and laid it all out, the journey, the war, the hate, the mosque, the change. What I didn't know was that someone in the back of that class heard something different than everyone else. They heard, "This guy knows how to make a bomb. And now he's a Muslim." Panic. Fear. They picked up the phone and called the FBI. Now look, I wasn't upset. Not really. I understood. But what they didn't know was that the bomb was already gone, disassembled, dismantled, disposed of. Because by then, I was a Muslim. And contrary to popular belief, a Muslim doesn't need a bomb. That's not what this is about. The FBI, they did find trace evidence. A bomb dog sniffed out some old chemical residue. So I took them to the shed where it used to be stored. I cooperated. Because I had nothing to hide anymore. But that was the day everything broke wide open. People started to find out. My secret. It was out. Even my wife didn't know until that moment. I'd kept it from everyone, pure ego. I thought, this is my mission. Just me. No one else. Fewer people meant less risk of being stopped. So when the police showed up and handcuffed me on the front lawn, that's exactly when she pulled into the driveway, with my daughter in the car. They stepped out, confused, staring. Me, sitting there in cuffs. Now, technically, it's just procedure, the officer said. Handcuffs for safety. But let's be honest, once the cuffs are on, you're under arrest, whether they say the words or not. It wasn't long after that the local mosque community started to hear about it. The newspaper got a hold of the story. Rumors began to swirl. And then, came the confrontation. I was invited to dinner at the home of one of the founding families of the Islamic Center. I showed up, just grateful to be there, surrounded by people I now saw as family. We were passing dishes, sharing laughs. Then Bibi Barami, bless her heart, looked me dead in the eyes. "Brother Richard," she said, "what is this we hear, that you were going to blow up the Islamic Center?" My stomach dropped. Shame swept over me. These people had welcomed me. They knew I had been a soldier. They knew I'd been in their homelands. They had every reason to fear me. But they didn't. They embraced me anyway. And now I had to tell them the truth. So I did. I said, yes. That was my plan. But I didn't go through with it, because of you. I looked around the room. It's because of you that I didn't. You showed me humanity, something I didn't even know I'd lost. You saved my life. All our lives. Silence fell. Then, a few of the brothers stood up and hugged me. I wasn't used to that, never liked being touched much. "Whoa, whoa, distance, man," I muttered. But they just smiled, and I let it happen. It was surreal. A turning point. That dinner, those people, proved to me why I had changed. They cared. Because their faith taught them to care. As for my family, that part, well, that's kind of funny. I didn't tell my wife when I took Shaida. I came home, plopped on the couch like I'd just come back from a long shift. She looked at me nervously. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's great," I said. She nodded slowly. I waited a beat, then casually added, "I'm a Muslim." She froze. "You're a what?" "I took Shaida today." "You what?" Now, mind you, I didn't have all the best explanations. My Islamic vocabulary was baby level. I started comparing it to baptism just to give her a reference point. She just stared at me. Then finally said, "Well, I'll tell you one thing, I'm not putting anything around my head." I laughed. "You're not Muslim. That's not even a conversation." She stormed off, came back a minute later and added, "And another thing, if you're thinking of having more than one wife, I won't be one of them." I laughed again. Honestly, at that point, I wasn't sure I wanted even one. But here's the twist. Not long after, we were leaving the university and I decided to joke. I said, "So now that you're Muslim, about that more than one wife thing." She gave me this death stare. "Don't make me pull this car over." I chuckled. "I'm the one driving. How are you gonna pull the car?" "I will pull it over," she snapped. Classic. But in all seriousness, Dr. Sabil, he was visiting Muncie and gave a lecture at the university. My wife and daughter came with me. That night, they asked him the questions I couldn't answer. And that very evening, both of them took Shaida. I was stunned. Joyfully stunned. I had never seen that coming. When I look back now, I hated myself. For the things I'd done. The things I believed. Outwardly, I pretended it was for the right reasons. But inside, I knew. I knew I was wrong. And it was eating me alive. I was suicidal. No doubt. There's a photo in Stranger at the Gate, black uniforms, faces covered. That was my team. I'm the only one still alive. Every other guy in that photo took his own life after getting out of the military. That would have been me. I left the military for 2 years, couldn't handle civilian life, went right back in. There was nothing else. I had no anchor, no purpose. I was next in line. But Allah had a different plan. When I first became Muslim, I asked the question, why did I have to go through all that? Why the war, the hate, the darkness? Why not just a bookstore Quran and a quiet conversion? And the answer, deep down, came back clear, none of your business. But with time, I understood. Because of who I was, I had to go through all of it. I was hard-headed, aggressive, prideful. The pain was part of the cleansing. And now, because of that pain, I have a mission. I have a purpose. And I hold on to it tightly. And if I had one chance to speak to every non-Muslim in the world, here's what I'd say. Take a breath. Seriously, just breathe. The fear you feel. The anger. The mistrust. It's not real. It's manufactured. Conditioned. Take a breath. And read the Quran. Just read it. Even if you never become a Muslim, you will walk away wiser. Because that's how the book works. That's how truth works. And who knows, it might just save your life.